Dear listeners, welcome to Australia podcast Scientist on Stage, a podcast that shines light on the human being behind the scientist. A meaningful conversation with the scientist about their own journey, about logic and rationality, and the hidden emotions behind that rationality. These are their authentic stories. Our guest is Claudia Ylla Arbós, flood expert and working on climate adaptation in France. Which path shall we take after finishing a PhD in science? We talked about working in an international environment, moving from country to country, and dealing with cultural differences. What was her advice about becoming even more authentic while being far from the place where we were born and grew up? This is Claudia making friends while struggling. Claudia, what a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell us first what you do, who you are.
So I am a flood expert, like you said, at AXA Climate, that's in Paris. And what I do is bridge a gap between science and different disciplines, be it insurance, being consultancy, and at the end it's client questions. Am I going to be in a big flood risk in 2030, in 2050? Do I need to adapt? How? Is it better to place my assets in this location or in this location, etc., etc.?
And who is the I in this conversation?
I'm placing about companies of whatever kind. I'm talking about be it companies that have a portfolio of assets, be it hotels, be it anything, like any kind of building, residences for elderly people, whatnot. It can be companies that have industrial plants. It can be municipalities, cities, or even own countries that want to know where do they need to direct most efforts or most economic or infrastructural to protect the most vulnerable populations against a climatic risk. It's quite varied, actually. I think that's one of the nice parts of the company that I work on, that there's a large variety of things. And I guess I wanted to go to the private industry precisely to get to know a bit the outside world. I would phrase it to myself like to know how the world works. So that's what I'm getting, and that's very nice. And that's connected to climate change long term, which is something very dear to me and something that I feel passionate about.
Oh, nice to hear. I know you from the time you're doing your PhD at Delft University of Technology, and you moved from the Netherlands to Paris. Tell us, how was the transition from doing the PhD to really work in a company now?
It was a process. I think that the decision to work for the private industry came a bit late. For the longest time, I wanted to work in international organizations and international cooperation and something closer to the public sector. And it was a long process to figure out that maybe that's not exactly what I needed at the time. I did try. Some things worked out, some things didn't. But then I realized that I was in a more energetic moment of my life, and I felt that the private industry would move a bit faster, which was closer to what I needed. And in terms of transition, it's been a relatively smooth transition because despite being in the private sector, I work in a science team. So my colleagues can be similar to the colleagues I had during my PhD, as in half of them at least, if not more, have finished their PhDs recently. It's an international setting. So there's, from the get-go, a lot to bond with or about. So it's been smooth in that sense. Then there's a lot of learning how the world works, as I was saying, that's more of like there's a learning curve in that regard, and the pace has nothing to do with academia, which of course also means that the depth that you get in your everyday also has nothing to do with academia. So that is an adjustment. And that is an adjustment on very small things, be it like how you focus, how you communicate, how how you plan your work.
At what moment did you realize, during your PhD or before your PhD, that you wanted to move then to work in a company? As you said, I wanted to work in an international organization and with something related with climate and climate change. How was that realization for you? What motivated you?
To start with, that's an interesting fact. I think I never wanted to pursue an academic career, like a fully academic career. And I feel that's something important to say, because a question that I will always get in this context is like, oh, are you disappointed so that then you moved to the private sector? And I don't think that was it. I think I had an interesting talk at some moment. It's quite fascinating how sometimes like one talk at one moment at the right time with a person that might be an important person in your life or not might plant a seed that might redirect you later in life in a way that's quite important. Like you were saying, I was considering working mostly for international organizations, so I looked for anything United Nations related, all variations of that. And in that process, I had the chance to talk to a friend, like an old colleague / friend from my dad who works at UNICEF. And I just approached, can you tell me a bit what it is like, just to get to know a bit, no? And I was telling him that I was thinking about what to do next, the things that I found interesting. And then he told me very casually, have you considered the private sector? And I was like, well, actually, no. I think I had a lot of prejudice, even, I can say it like that. I had a lot of prejudice in the private sector being, I guess, maybe some kind of cold, ruthless, cruel world, only obsessed with money making and without strong values. Involuntarily, kind of, we make this, I don't know, these differences between, doing the good or working for profit, kind of. It's prejudice, I guess, founded on something, because there is part of that in some part of the private sector. This person that I talked to went on directly to discuss banking, to discuss consultancy, to discuss insurance, and I was like, what do you mean? So of all this prejudice that I have, banking, insurance would be like at the worst of the worst. And he told me something that did change my mind, which was that these groups at the end, the word he used was they have a lot of traction. And he said that because they have so much money after all, and because they move so much money, they can do a lot of things and they can have a practical impact that a lot of the organizations that I was considered could not have, because neither do they have the money nor the time and the administration and the bureaucracy that goes into having impact. Well, at the end, sort of jeopardizes the impact that you can bring. And I guess that hit the right chords for me at the time, because at the end, the underlying question was, what is it that I want in an international organization? I think I want impact and value alignment. And then that mindset shifted for me, because if I wanted impact, then maybe there were sectors that I was not considering where the impact could potentially be larger in a shorter term. And I must confess that the fact that the person that said this was someone that I respected, and I was in what I thought was a good position in an international organization, to me it gave it some more legitimacy than if just a friend would have said it.
From your experience working in an international environment, what do you think much more is possible because we are international?
I think it's openness. Because we certainly, well, most of us grow up in one culture, which means there's a vision on life that we have. There's things that are logical to us, that are common sense to us. And because we call them common sense, we take them as absolute. and you go out somewhere else, and I think a different culture or a different country is one of the most obvious ways to realize this. And then all of a sudden what's common sense to you is not common sense to the other. And then that's a clash, because if it was common sense, in a way it was not arguable.
It was common sense, common what we do, why not be common anymore?
Exactly, and I think sometimes you need a huge contrast on that, and for that I can say cultural contrast. One of the first experiences that I had like that was the first time I went to Africa. I went to Cameroon, and that was a thought that I was having constantly during my time there, which is some things are common sense to me, but this is not common sense to the people that I'm with right now. Something very basic, which is the notion of time and schedule and eating schedules. We had a lot of fun moments, because we would go, I was there doing field work, and I was doing like field surveys of water infrastructure. So we would go from village to village, and we would talk to the responsible people for the water infrastructure. And then every time we would get to a place, the first thing that would happen was that we would be offered food. And not snacks or anything, just like chicken with rice or whatever. And it didn't matter what time of the day it was.
Was that seen as a welcoming?
Yes, certainly. And then the funny situation that we would keep getting into was that we would tell them, no, we already had lunch. It's not time for us to eat. And they were like, what do you mean it's not the time to eat? Like, is there like a fixed time to eat? If you're hungry, you eat. If you're not, you don't. And it was like, interesting. Because again, like the fact that you eat 2-3 times a day at a certain time, that's logic and common sense to me. It's not a question. I don't question that. But then that was a small example where it was the logic, the common sense was something different.
I wonder if that is also seen if you refuse the food when you're coming in a community, that is not a sign of being part of the community, but maybe experienced as rude or...
It was certainly weird. And I'm guessing the fact that we were also so different, and at the time, like, we were two little white girls surrounded by people that look nothing like us, that was different enough to, I guess, maybe not be outraged, I don't know. But it was always a funny situation. And this was one, the time factor was another one. We would go to a place and we would ask for, person X that is supposed to show us around, and they would be like, they are coming. But they are coming could be they are coming in 5 minutes, or they are coming, sometimes we waited 2 hours. And we would ask for the time, and sometimes I had the feeling that they would give us a time, not because there was a time, but just because they thought that was something we wanted to hear. So, they could tell you half an hour, but it didn't mean anything. And then again, that was also something that it's like, okay, logic and common sense to me is not logic and common sense here. And so that was very interesting, not only for the openness of we are all different, but I think the biggest thing for me was that I realized this also holds back home. And this also holds for the person that I think is closest to me. What's common sense to me is not common sense to them.
We characterize in a way the cultures and the structures and the countries. We are born and we live and we study and we work and everything that we do. But in fact, it's not only the culture, but also the person within the culture might behave differently. This interesting part about the timing is one of the criteria to characterize in a way without stereotyping the different cultures, how we deal with the time. Is it linear, where we say we meet at 10 o'clock, we meet at 10 o'clock, and if we are 5 minutes late, we send a WhatsApp or a message saying, I'm going to be 5 minutes late. If we'll do that in another culture, we will say, I think you need to visit the psychologist. So it's exactly that part, how we deal with the time.
I think it's that part, like sometimes you need to see it in a huge contrast to realize that it also holds when the contrast is not big. And I think when the contrast is small, it's harder to conceive that there are differences, that what's common sense to me is common sense to you, because we have so much in common that it's easier to assume that we have everything, so to say, in common.
We have so much in common, and even if we have things differently, we enrich each other.
Yeah.
And I think in the environment of society and the science, that we definitely in the environment of science where we are right now, we often, without even realizing how international we are, how much we grow, and we get it for granted at times.
Yeah.
And we might hit the walls as the way we communicate with each other or not understanding each other. But it's then the bigger context then.
Yes. At some point to me, the international aspect was pretty much a non-negotiable. I think that's also something that made me click and shift. At some point I considered for working for the public sector, be it here in the Netherlands or being in Switzerland, where I also lived and worked. One of the reasons why I ended up discarding the working for the public sector within a country was that I would not have the international component. And that's become something very important for me. I think precisely because, like you say, I've moved around for the past 10 and a half years already. It's been a formative decade of my life, right? It's been the 20s to 30th years. You're still configuring yourself as an adult. It's a third of my life, and that has been in an international setting. So it's shaped me. It's made me who I am, and therefore not having it now feels like something is missing. It's really a type of richness that I miss if I don't have it. Yes.
Then very quickly, what was your travel journey from country to country, and how do you think that shaped you for who you are right now?
It started in Spain, in Barcelona, where I'm from. I grew up there, I started my studies there, and then fourth year of my college studies, I moved to Switzerland. That was just for an exchange, supposedly, but I never came back from my exchange. After I finished my exchange, I applied for a master's in the same city, which was Lausanne, and then everything kept being postponed a bit more. First it's the master's, then it's a gap year or period, then it's some work, and then at some point I decided that I wanted to do a PhD, and that's when I moved to the Netherlands, to Delft, where I spent the 6 years, because it was first PhD, then a bit of contract work for the public sector, and then I took some time off, and I found the current job that I have in Paris, in France. One of the main aspects is the adaptability. It's meeting new people pretty much constantly, which is enriching but can also be exhausting. But at the same time, it also forces you to constantly adapt. I think the difference when you're there for a very long period at the same place with the same people, there's something very good to it that I might even miss, which is the whole route making and the whole settling and having being very anchored. But it's also very comfortable in a way. So this discomfort of having new people from different places, navigating simple things like the organization, logistics, and bureaucracy of each country, the languages, the whole living with roommates that change all the time, the whole colleagues changing quickly as well. I think the adaptability is a very big one. And then I think the other one probably, and the one that is maybe even dearest to me, is that it's helped me, I guess, like get closer and closer to my most authentic self. If I would have stayed in the place where I grew up, there was a moment that I felt too much social pressure. I could not detach from the ideas of what I am supposed to be. I felt that there were things that were better than others. And I obviously had to be on the better side, which means that I ended up, I found myself doing things or pursuing career goals that at the end were not necessarily what I wanted. But there was not even a question of, do I want this or not? The question was, is this better? Is this better seen or perceived? There was something very interesting when I moved to Switzerland. My background is in civil engineering. And in Spain, civil engineering traditionally has been a super reputed degree. And it's been something that's very hard and that not everybody can do and that it's tough.
It's prestige.
Yes, and admittedly, there was part of it in my choosing it. But then I moved to Switzerland and it was the opposite. Civil engineering was sometimes even considered the easy engineering that people that were not good enough to do physics and math would do. So that was one of my first, what I call humility cures, because you've been told during your first years of studies that you're so good because you're doing something so tough, and then you go somewhere else and they're like, oh, but I cannot, like a lot of people in Spain in civil engineering would not even want to be civil engineers. They would want to go into consultancy or into banking or into a bunch of these things. And then back in Switzerland at these job fairs, we would, sometimes from our Spanish background, go ask these consultancies like, oh, do you have an internship for us? And they would look at us like, what do you mean you're a civil engineer? Like, there's obviously nothing for you here. So that was a shock to the system, but I think it's always good. And the reason I'm saying is that in a way it actually removed a lot of pressure, because all of a sudden I was surrounded by people that were into this because that's what they wanted. They did not do that to be someone. They did it because that's what they were most connected to. And in a way it reconnected myself with the reason why I was doing that. Why do I like this? Why am I here? Why do I want to do this? For one. And for two, obviously, because you've not grown up in this place. This place does not hold expectations on you. And therefore, it's a huge way that's lifted. And I think so being abroad, it reconnected me with myself.
You say to becoming even more authentic.
Yes.
Or find the authenticity. It's an interesting concept. We are in a certain community. We might identify with that community, feeling part of it. And now you make a big jump to go to another community. And then you find your authenticity, who you really are.
I think in a way we define ourselves through the groups that we're in. When you're for a very long period in the same group or in a group or in groups that are very similar, it's almost like there's part of this definition of yourself that you don't do, that the group does for you. I am certain there's something good to it. But I think it's also good to sometimes be lost, really, to be like, okay, well, now I don't have a reference. Because when you don't have a reference, you have to create one for yourself. And that forces you to look inward and to decide, what is my reference? And that can be painful and that can take some time, but it's also freeing. And I think once you've tasted that kind of freedom, it's very hard to go back to a place where you feel like you don't have it. So I guess that's the biggest way in which being abroad has shaped me.
Tell us more about what you define then as a pain.
Well, you're very much by yourself. You're very much on your own. And it doesn't mean, of course, you will make friends, especially if you go abroad while you're studying. The most inevitable ways to make friends is going through struggle together. And when you have a shared experience, well, then that's almost immediate bonding. And so you will meet these people, especially if you go abroad for studying. It's almost harder not to make friends and making friends in that sense. But after all, it's new people in your life. So it's people that don't know you, it's people that don't know where you come from, and I don't mean that geographically, but more human experience-wise. So ultimately, you are alone in that. I have this sort of theory that there's a difference between the oh yes and the oh okay. Meaning, when you explain something to someone, when you share an experience with someone, if these people knows where you come from in a global way, so to say, or like in a deep way, you will share this experience and they will say, oh yes, meaning, oh yes, I recognize what you're telling me. If they don't know where you come from, then it's like, oh, okay. As in, I can listen to what you tell me, it's interesting, but I cannot say that, yes, I recognize where you come from. And I think that's one part of the loneliness of being abroad and being with new people. You're surrounded by a bunch of, oh, okay experiences, but not, oh, yes. And the comfort that the, oh, yes brings is huge. And that's something that you need. And that's why, well, that's the role that your family and friends growing up have played. And all of a sudden you don't have them anymore. So that's certainly enriching, but it's also painful because sometimes when you're doing new things, well, you need that comfort and you don't have it. And then you need to put a lot of effort from your side. You need to be extremely proactive to get the support that you need. And that does not come necessarily easy. It takes time, like it or not. So that's a part of it that can be painful.
This loneliness, of course, each one of us experiences it in a different way, make a transition from a culture to another, in the same time connects us, as you say. So I feel alone, you feel alone, but let's feel alone together. But that makes us also to connect. And I think about loneliness as something relative. I can be alone physically and don't feel alone and lonely.
For sure.
Or I can be together in a group and I feel alone then. Even though there are people around me. So it's very relative on the feeling that we have associated with the loneliness.
I experienced an evolution myself. When I first moved, the last thing that I wanted was to be surrounded by Spanish people. I was like, I'm living this experience abroad. It's to get to know other cultures, other people. So I'm not going to waste my time with people that I already know. Almost refused to get to meet other Spanish people. And then fast forward 10 years later, I almost immediately tried to look for Spanish people abroad. And in that sense, I experienced the evolution of like, okay, I go out for the first time, I want to discover new things, etc. And then with time, it's like, yeah, okay, but I also need discomfort. I also need people to tell me, oh yes, I recognize you for your experience. And then in a way, I will even say it's reconciled me even with parts of my culture that I did not necessarily appreciate, because I've realized, oh, wait a minute, we share a lot of things. We share a culture that we've grown with, like it or not. So there's a recognition of the other person that you can get that's on a whole other level. And if I may say, it can even be deeper than with some of the people that I will have back home, because then I will share double. I will share the culture, but I will also share the being abroad. To go through, okay, I'm not at home anymore. I need to find a life for myself that's not at home. So I would even dare say that some of my deepest connections and friendships have ended up being with people from my own country, but abroad. I would certainly not change it for the world. I actually reflect on this a lot, because I do keep friendships in Spain from when I was 3 years old, and I'm so glad I keep this. Actually, one of my dearest friends is a friend from not even primary school, whatever's before that, kindergarten type of school. And we will meet every time I am back in Spain. And sometimes we have had very different experiences in that sense, because I left 10 years ago. I've moved a lot, and he has stayed in Barcelona all his life. And then we will sometimes exchange. And one of the last times I went there, I was telling him, sometimes I think you've understood something that I have not understood, because I will keep going around and looking for all these new things, because I do find them enriching. But then I will miss the roots. I will miss having an anchor. I will miss having a community, and I will try to create this every time I go somewhere, and I will learn the language of the place that I'm at, and I will look for local connections and local people and even physical spots that I can attach to, be it a cafe, be it whatever. But still, I will look at him and his life and the support systems that he has, and I'm going to be like, okay, I think, maybe all of this was already there from the beginning and I did not understand that. And I left looking for something else, but it was all there from the beginning. But then he will tell me, well, yes and no, as in, you've also experienced a range of things that I cannot even dream of at this point. And that's a richness for your life that nothing can take that away. That's also precious. And to an extent, I think, true. I mean, he is also right. And I don't think there's right or wrong in that sense. I think we all have some kind of drive. And whatever that drive is, if that drive for some people is to go around and look for new things, for some other people it's to stay and deepen what it is that they create in one spot. So I do think that we are more of an animal than we care to admit, that we pretend to have a level of control on our emotions and decisions that we actually don't have, but we think we do. To a greater extent, at least, than when we actually do. And a lot of decisions we take, but deep inside, we don't know why we take these decisions. Something pushed us towards that, but
maybe the instinct. This is what you're referring to. But what pushes us is the instinct to take
yes.
a decision or to do something.
Yes.
Is it always rational?
No, I actually think in most cases it's not. Like, we will disguise it as a rational decision, but I don't think it is. I think, if anything, I think the decisions that I've taken, I almost feel like I have not taken them. I almost feel like the decisions came to me rather than me to the decisions. It's like I was just the vehicle for these decisions to emerge, but like if they had always been there.